Welcome to Financial Clarity, the podcast dedicated to helping service-based small business owners achieve financial success. Join us as we demystify financial concepts, get practical tips from seasoned entrepreneurs, and discover strategies to increase profit and value. Hannah Smolinski here. I'm the host of the Financial Clarity podcast, where I connect successful entrepreneurs, financial experts, and leaders in the small business community. Past guests include Julie Fry, who runs Your Expert Guest, specializing in podcast guesting, and Louise Brogan, who specializes in professional services companies and how they use LinkedIn to improve their presence and return on investment. Today's episode is brought to you by my company, Clara CFO Group. Clara CFO is dedicated to providing financial clarity and profit maximizing solutions to small businesses. The team at Clara CFO are seasoned accounting professionals with a heart for small business, and we help growth-minded entrepreneurs thrive through fractional CFO services and financial education. To learn more about Clara CFO Group, and how we can help your business, you can go to claracfo.com or just reach out to me directly and find me on LinkedIn. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to give a quick shout out to the person who connected us, or how we got connected first. And that is Megan McNally. So Megan is the powerhouse behind the F-Bomb Breakfast Club here in Seattle. Yes, F-Bomb Breakfast Club. There were a few F-bombs dropped in this group, and it was a good time. But that's where Madeline, today's guest, and I met. And I wanted to just say thank you to Megan for creating a space where awesome humans could connect about their businesses. So thank you, Megan. And I'd like to introduce you to today's guest, Madeline Reeves. Madeline is the founder and CEO of Fearless Foundry, a creative consultancy that supports ambitious humans in building branding, marketing, and business development strategies that allow them to make meaningful impacts in the world. Madeline is an outspoken force for promoting equity, collaboration, and community in the business, and she spends her time working with clients, creating content, hosting the Finding Fearless podcast, all while leading her team. So, Madeline, thank you so much for being on the Financial Clarity podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Hannah. It's great to be here with you.
Yes. Well, I am glad that we got to connect. We've connected kind of over time over the past couple years, but I've been able to be on your podcast, which is fabulous. People need to go and listen to it. And it's just good to see you again.
It's great to see you too. I love the way that we've come up with these continuous ways to stay connected and to keep sharing about our businesses too, because it's been cool to watch your growth over the past few years. And, obviously we stay connected via social, but it's always great to talk in person.
Definitely. And I like too that we can always connect on money and marketing, which is not always two topics that get along very well. But I love how you always are really open about talking about money, women in money, businesses. And so I am really glad that we're going to be able to have an open conversation today. And I know you're going to be really transparent and bring some really awesome information too. So can you just get us started here with telling us a little bit about your business journey and how you came to owning your own company?
Yeah, it's definitely a winding path. And I think, you know this both from working with entrepreneurs as well as, leading this show that, it typically isn't that somebody comes out the gate going, I'm going to, build my own company and this is what it's going to be. Maybe one out of every 10 stories I hear is something of that nature, but mine is definitely more of a, I wouldn't say accidental entrepreneur, but it took me a while to get to that place. I actually grew up in a pretty entrepreneurial family. My dad owned his own law practice. My mom owns one of the largest art publications in the Northwest. And so when I got out of college and went into the world of corporate, I was the black sheep of my family because I wasn't, starting my own business. My grandparents were entrepreneurs. My brother had started a company right out of college. So yeah, I was the one and only for, going to get these things like a 401k and healthcare. It was like, what are you doing? And why is that important? And so prior to starting my own company, I had a career, a successful career for about a decade in the space of technology. And that was not something I really planned on ending up in. My background in schooling was I was originally pre-med at University of Washington, and then I got a degree in medical anthropology and global health. I really am fascinated with systems-based thinking and strategy and looking at complex problems and figuring out, how do you find solutions and collaboration and looking at things at more of like an in-depth perspective and a community-based perspective and things like that. But when I got out of school, I was a mom to a little kid who was about almost 2 at the time, and I needed to find a job. And so I got a job at a software startup that was in my hometown. And that led to the next role in tech, which led to the next role in tech. And by the time I was about 26, 27, I was the global business development director for a software startup that you and I both know pretty well. It's a popular tool in the accounting space. And so I had kind of built this career that was working with accountants, working with tech solutions, and working around this kind of intersection of those two. But oftentimes in spaces where the company or product that I was representing was really entering into a new market. And so a lot of what I felt like the skills that I developed was kind of looking at, this product market fit and how do we bring, a brand narrative to life and how do we market that story and share that with the world in a way that's going to drive, customer adoption. And so a lot of times it was just because I was in super small teams that didn't have budget or bandwidth or staff to support me in those endeavors. I kind of on my own started studying marketing and branding and doing a lot of guerrilla marketing so that I could reach my goals. And while I was doing that, I started to have a lot of friends who were approaching me. And I think we were all in this season of transition where I think there's this moment you reach when you're going from your mid to your late 20s where maybe the rose-colored glasses come off a little bit and you start to realize like, there's things that I want to be doing, but it's not going to work out for me in this working environment. So a lot of women I knew were starting companies of their own so that they could have the flexibility they needed for their lives or their families, or so they could make better pay, or so that they could have more autonomy. And they were approaching me going like, hey, like, can you help me build my first website? Or like, hey, like, I'm trying to figure out how I set up all this like Facebook, Instagram, social media stuff. Or like, hey, can you help me build like business cards? And I kind of feel like in a way it was like the universe like tapping me on a shoulder, being like, actually, like maybe come over here. Because it just kind of kept happening over and over again. And I swear I would be like in a Starbucks line or like in a sauna at the pool, and like some random woman would just be like, yeah, I'm thinking about starting my own company. And I'd be like, oh, okay, like here's what you need to do. And so I was doing that on the side for about a year and a half, just consulting and coaching with people. And oftentimes I was not even getting paid. I was like trading, services or things like that. And it just started to keep me up at night. Like, what if I could do this full time? What would it look like to step out and support entrepreneurs as they scale, particularly from a branding and a marketing and a business development lens? And that urge just got stronger and stronger. And I started doing back of the napkin math of being like, okay, I would need this many clients at this much a month, to replace my salary. I was a primary breadwinner at the time. And, it just stuck. And so after about a year and a half of side hustling, I reached a point where it had become pretty clear that in the role that I was in, that my growth potential wasn't really going to go anywhere further with that company. And so I let them know that I was thinking about doing this. And so we agreed to part ways. And so at the start of 2019, I, with like maybe 2 months worth of runway in my pocket, like left my big, cushy, very nice tech job and was like, I better figure this out fast because we had just bought in a house. I had a 1-year-old baby. I was like, I need to be able to support this family. So hit the ground running, and it's been a wild ride ever since.
That's amazing. And I think that you're right. And that the story of, hey, we did corporate and starting to see the writing on the wall of like, this is not going to give me what I'm really hoping for, or the role models I have in corporate are not necessarily what I want for my life. I was hearing that a lot too, before I started my business. So, congratulations for like making the big jump, because it's a huge risk to be able to do that. And then since then, you've been serving clients and doing amazing work and being creative and doing branding and marketing and all these different things. So, I would like to understand for my own just clarity, and also for the audience as well, obviously. How do you describe the difference between branding and marketing? Because I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of confusion between those two words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this because this is the core confusion I see in the world, and it's a really important and distinct difference. And one of the ways I like to describe them is branding is actually internal work, and marketing is external work. So
Mm,
branding is really about understanding the core of who you are as a business as well as who you're here to serve. Like, what are you meant to do? What is your purpose? What is your mission, your vision, your values? Those define who you are as a brand. And then marketing is how do you go about communicating that with the world? So that's what channels do you select? What are the sort of stories you share? What are the content pillars that you have and the core topics you talk about, to introduce who you are as a brand.
mm,
But, those are two really, really different things. The other things that a lot of folks get wrong is they think that branding is just the elements, so
right.
the visuals, and that is a core component of brand. It's the logos, the graphics, the colors, the fonts, those sort of things matter, but those are actually just one element of branding. That's called brand identity. And my specialty and the thing that I love doing most is what's called brand strategy. And that, in my opinion, is, especially when I work with founders, is pretty soul level work of
Mhm.
really answering these core questions of, why are you doing this work and who does it matter for? And what draws you to that, and how are you going to do that differently, and what is the promises you're going to make to the customers that you're here to serve, and the development of some really clear documentation that ultimately becomes this very important guidepost for the ways that you show up, the ways you speak about your business. And I can often tell in the early stages, because a lot of people don't do that. They don't do that work because they're just like, I just need to get a website up and I just
Right.
need to get a logo. But there's typically a moment that I see happen, maybe it's 2, 3, 4 years into business where there's a lack of identity around what the business is
Mhm.
because they haven't taken that time to do that level of introspection. So that's why I say branding is always really internal work. And then what makes your branding come to life is externalizing that through marketing. But oftentimes folks focus on marketing first when they haven't really gotten clear about who they are. And that shows up and often leads to content that's maybe disjointed in nature.
Mm. That's so good, and I see that happening, like, very, very clearly. I mean, I went through that myself where you spur and I think there probably is, you would probably agree, like, when you're first starting out, you're just trying to get people to pay you to do stuff.
Totally. And I get it. I mean, I've done it too, right? Like
Yeah.
I can totally relate.
Totally, and then you start to say, "Okay, who do I really like working with? What services do I even really like performing, and where do I need to go next? Where do I need to show up?" And we start to kind of see it. We see it in the financials really, as
Mhm.
you start to see like, okay, um, there kind of comes a point, and I would probably agree with that, like 2 to 4 years, somewhere usually into a service business where you kind of have, okay, we can't move forward even in some like business development or, which conferences do we go to? How are we hiring people? What are we telling them? Like kind of it starts to feel like people get a little stuck.
Mhm.
And even like if they get stuck in like their pricing, maybe they
Mhm.
can't even like price the way that they really need to or something. Sometimes I have to be the one, which you would be proud of me as a CFO, actually being like, I think you might need to invest in branding.
Mhm.
When I see people just kind of have no direction, they just are floundering.
Mhm. Yeah, and it is, it gives you this anchor to come back to. And I also think for, folks who are building a business that is truly an extension of themselves, they're not just like manufacturing a product, but like a service-based business, it can also provide this really good core distinguishing point between you and the business.
Mm,
Because oftentimes, unless you are a service-based business provider who it's like you are the brand, there's definitely those instances. But there are a lot of folks that I know that get to that point who want to start doing things to differentiate themselves from the business they're building, whether that's by adding team members or, by delegating the work to other places or, bringing on other people to the project. And if the business and your identity are a little bit like wrapped up in each other, it can feel really muddy and murky on how do you explain that to clients? How do you communicate that on your website? And so also that process of doing the branding work can help you really distinguish, this is the brand. This is the brand that it belongs to the business. And I can separate myself from that. I'm the founder of that company, or I'm the CEO of that company, but I'm not that company, which means, I can be at home on a Saturday and not feel like I'm having to carry it around with me all the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and having that separation too is actually an increased value to the business as well. If it's not so wrapped up in the personal identity of the CEO, thinking, if down the road, if a business wants to be able to sell 5-10 years down the road or something like that, it is much more valuable to a potential buyer to not have that identity wrapped up in the CEO.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
awesome. I would love to hear a little bit about, I know you've made some transitions in kind of your thinking about growing a business. And I know we could talk about branding and marketing all day, and you have an amazing podcast that people can go and learn more about those kind of topics, and then your amazing guests that you bring on. But I kind of want to move the conversation to some of the things we were talking about before we pressed record today. And that's kind of this concept of I think there's a lot of talk about how you grow a business and how you grow a service-based business. And you've done that. Like you grew $1 million agency, you had employees, you kind of did the thing. But I know your mindset's changing a little bit on that, and you've had kind of some different thoughts. So I'd love to just kind of start there and give it a little bit of an open mic for you on that.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And, sometimes I feel like the lessons that I go through as an entrepreneur are a really important way for me to then turn around and pass it on to somebody else, because these are the things that I wish I would have heard when I was starting my business. And it's funny, my podcast actually predates my business. I joke sometimes that it was like my baby little stepping stone towards becoming an entrepreneur, because I actually started it 2 years before I started my company. And it's always been talking to people who are entrepreneurial in nature. And so, I started that show for the same reason. I wanted to hear other people talk about these kind of messier, murkier things. And at the time, and still today, I feel like most of the stories are just like these massive success stories. And it's great to hear, those stories of women who have really like made it, quote unquote. But I think there's a lot of things that we navigate, especially in the earlier stage of entrepreneurship, that are kind of glossed over, of like, oh yeah, I struggled, but it's great now. And so one of those things for me was, I built my initial business model very much off of just kind of like what you were describing, of like, what can I get people to pay me to do, as opposed to, having a very clear vision of, this is what I want to be doing, this is how much I'm going to charge for it, this is my ideal client. I didn't have clarity on that. And so in the first year, I was, consulting as a solo consultant, and I was, fortunate enough to have a strong enough network and base that I had created a lot of work for myself, but I had almost created too much work too quickly. And so, at the time, the models that I was around, both from like an entrepreneurial community perspective, as well as like coaches I had, like the vibe at the time, and this is like early 2020, irony, was like, oh, you should start an agency. That was the messaging. That was every Instagram ad I was getting, as well as, again, this wider community of like, you need to grow a team. And in some ways, I also recognized how, coming out of the world of technology, there is very much a one-track mindset of what it means to be successful. And I had come out of a software startup where I'd grown, 300% year over year. And in my mind, nothing less than that would be successful in my own business endeavor. And so I was just focusing on growing as fast as possible. And because there was only one of me, I needed people to do that. And so I did. I grew year over year at 300% for the first 3 years in business. I got to a team of, at one point, 12 people, which was like a mix of employee and contractors, but 12 people that I was fully accountable to and was leading at all times. And that mythical $1 million. We came just shy of, if I'm being totally honest, but like, just at the edge of $1 million in revenue. And it really broke my soul. It really broke my spirit. It really put me in a lot of debt, and it made me really have to question what was I doing that for? And in an interesting turn of events, one of our large kind of niches that we had built based off of my background was working with folks in the realm of technology. And prior to laying off employees, all those companies laid off their outside vendors. And so we were an external marketing agency to many of those companies. And so in a period of 4 months, I lost about 50% of my revenue.
Wow.
And it made me have to scale back my team. And as I scaled back my team, I started to feel less and less stressed. And I started to find time for myself and find time for my family, and to realize, wow, every year, even though we were making more money than ever, I was actually taking home less and less money.
Yeah.
And the company was costing more and more to run. And so, this past year, 12 months or so, has been a really big shifting season for me of looking at, for the first time ever in the history of my business, like, what do I really want to lead? What do I really want to build? Who do I want to be accountable to? What kind of projects do I actually really like looking at? I've done a bunch of different things over the past few years, and it's really made me recognize I love project-based work more than I love recurring. I love, working really closely side by side with founders and helping them navigate, particularly both at the internal level from like a coaching and development perspective, but also from helping them, translate that into things like their brand strategies and their marketing. And it's also made me recognize that like, I don't necessarily want to be beholden to a team anymore. And so what I have been really fortunate to find over the past few years that I don't think I had starting out was a really, really powerful network of collaborators. And I think, again, in those early days, you're just like, oh, I can do that. I can do that. I can do that. And then that's how you end up overworked, versus as you become more seasoned, you're like, yeah, I'm a brand strategist. That's the core and heart of what I do. And I'm a creative consultant. And, I'm actually very good at identifying the pieces of the puzzle you need. And if that requires, a graphic designer, if that requires a videographer, if that requires XYZ, I'm not going to claim that I'm the expert in that. I'm just going to bring those experts in the room. And so I've really worked over the past few years to develop a pretty strong partner network that I'm pretty proud of, and feel like I can more confidently go into those conversations and be like, I don't have to be all the things to everybody, but I can actually just say, I'm the expert at finding the people who can come in and work with us in this way. And so as a result, my business model is really, really shifting as I ask myself those questions. And, the one other thing I'll say is I know that I'm not alone in that pursuit. It's been really interesting. I have a pretty strong network of entrepreneurs that I connect with. And there's a lot of other friends and folk that over the past few years have really decided maybe they want to scale something back, for the sake of their own well-being, and just doing the work that really matters to them, as opposed to being responsible for so many pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah. And everything gets more complex as you add team members, as you add, more positions, different functions in a business. I mean, yes, we might have all the functions, but they become like just so much bigger where you need to give a lot more attention to them. So I can totally understand that. And I've run into lots and lots of million plus business owners that are not making profits. And we have to look at things and just go like, does this make sense? I mean, at the end of the day, we're in business like for lots of different reasons, but the business also needs to make money over time. Otherwise it's a hobby.
Yeah.
And, there's only so much that it makes sense to, only so long that it makes sense to do that for. Do you feel like there were certain mindsets that you kind of had to address as you were kind of breaking down that sort of like success means 300% growth all the time versus what maybe it sounds like you're redefining success for yourself? Like, what are some of the mindsets that you've been going through?
So you're catching me like the call I had before this was with my therapist, the perfect timing on this.
Perfect. Now we get to have therapy.
there was two things that came up that I think are very, very informative. So one is, I definitely think there was a lot of messaging between kind of 2019 through 2021, and I still see it here and there, but especially in the women's online entrepreneurship space, that was success is seven figures.
Mm.
And I remember when I got to the end of that year, and we got our P&L and we were like so close, and I was like, I failed, and I was like, I had grown tremendously year over year. I'd done, so many things. And part of it was just this sheer burnout. But again, I think that there was a lot of external messaging around, we know the figure, right? Like less than 2% of female founders make it to seven figures in revenue. So it was like that whole, like, get to the 2% club, get to the 2% club. But as somebody who knocked right on the door of it, I was like, what, for what? Like, what does this lead to? So I think breaking that mentality is really, really important. And I have a lot of those conversations, with the clients that I coach with one-to-one, is like, who are you doing this for? Because if you're not doing it for yourself, if it doesn't mean something to you at a deep personal level, you know, you're going to reach a point where there's not going to be really any meaning in the work that you're doing at the end of the day. And so that is one. And then the other one that I think is a shift that I've really been working on over the past couple of years is I think that a lot of times, especially being socialized as female and then being in business, it's like this narrative of success can't just be about my success, that it has to be about the success of other people. And so, the projection of success I had was like, I have this team and I'm creating jobs for other people, and I'm creating, opportunity and benefits and, 401k and all these things. Because I don't think, I could say, yeah, I just want to be a consultant that takes home $250,000 a year and does really well for myself and has a lot of free time. Like, I don't think I felt comfortable saying that my success was just about myself when I started the company. I think that partially because I'm like an Enneagram 3 with a 2 wing, like I had to be in it for the service of others. But also I think there's a lot of conditioning that, like, if my business wasn't about like benefiting all these other people, was I actually successful or was I just selfish? And so I think that's also a mindset that I've had to really work through. And it also helps that, again, I have more women around me who are, doing things that they love and are very successful and in it for themselves. They don't have huge teams and they've determined that's what's best for them. That's allowed me to be like, that's not only an okay model, but in this season, if that's what that feels like success to me, I can embrace that.
Yeah. That's really good. And I'm pondering it, which I know I can't leave too much pondering space on our podcast. Otherwise it just sounds like awkward silence. So I will be thinking about that more later. I'm also an Enneagram 3 wing too. So, and I can see that for sure. I appreciate you sharing that. That idea of success is different for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to really think about what you define success to be in your business. So then at this point, like, what does that look like for you? Is it flexibility? Is it a number? Like, what are the things that are the triggers for you that are like, yes, that's getting checked, or that box is getting checked. I feel successful in that.
Yeah, I did this really interesting exercise recently at the guidance of one of my coaches, which was to just like make a list of like what feels like a yes and a no for me in this season, because I think it helps me remember that success is like this always evolving concept. So
Yes.
like, I don't look back and go, oh, well, that idea of success was wrong 3 years ago. It's just, that was my idea at the time. And now, what success looks like is really different. I'm going through a divorce this year. I moved into my own place, like what I need to provide for myself and what I want. My life looks really different. So yeah, success for me a lot in this season looks like flexibility. It looks like, wanting to be able to do things like, yeah, I knocked out this great project and it provided for me in this quarter. And now I'm going to take a whole week off because I want to, and,
Yes.
and again, when you have a team of people who you're beholden to, it's harder to step away in that way. And so flexibility is a big thing for me too. It's also, wanting to be able to, on the days that my kids have like early release, pick them up and be done with work for the day at that certain time and not feel like, the pressure of I've got to be working a full 40 because everybody else is or something like that. So flexibility, I would say, is kind of top priority. And then also it's working with clients on projects that I really, really adore. That's the hard part about having a team as well, was that you do have to say yes to certain things to pay the bills.
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of instances over the past few years there I said yes to projects that I look back on and I'm very proud of the work that I did. And I'm very proud of the work that my team did. But, would I have said yes to that work had I not had payroll to make? Probably not.
Mm.
And so, for me as well, it kind of reminds me of this meme that I'm sure you've seen. It's floating around Instagram. That's like, success is like a well-balanced nervous system. It's not feeling stressed. It's not feeling like I have to chase projects or people to ensure that I've got enough coming in the door. It's about really just finding like alignment and harmony between the work I want to be doing and the people who show up and say, hey, I want to work with you. And getting to work in that way is really wonderful, to have clients that you really love and to have projects that you really love. And then also to have the capacity and flexibility to schedule those things in a way that really works for me.
I resonate with that for sure. The flexibility piece is it's so hard to quantify. You can't quantify it, but it is a lot of a feeling of just being like, I know I don't have to panic because I have the ability to, work when I need to. That's really good. I also find it interesting, and I'm curious what it is about project work that is drawing you to that, because there's this, similar, probably some similar people who said success is seven figures. Probably also are some of those people saying retainers, get retainer work, that, long-term clients, let's do that. I mean, I love having long-term clients for the recurring revenue. But what is it about project work that has led you there?
This is something I've been evaluating, asking myself a lot over the last 6 months. Because again, one of these studies I've been doing is like, what is really lighting me up? What's the work I want to be doing? And I think it's about the depth of work that I get to do on some of the project-based pieces. So for example, like one of the core types of projects I love is brand strategy projects. And there is something really satisfying about going to work with a company or a founder, at this really deep level. For typically those projects last about 6 to 8 weeks. And then getting to this moment of completion where I get to say, this is the work we did. And here it is, and to hand them, a tangible deliverable that they will carry forward forever and that they will look back on forever. And it will be, a cornerstone to their business. Whereas, in the world of recurring marketing, the value of the work that we do gets diminished quite quickly. And so I have had a business model where, we had, recurring revenue that was coming in through retainer marketing contracts. It was like, we did your social media and we did your blog and we did your newsletter. And because of the nature of that constant cranking out of content, the value that's placed on each piece you do is deeply diminished. And also the energetic drain and the creativity of just always having to be on the hamster wheel to be the content engine is really draining too. Now, that's not to say that I don't love to do marketing strategy moments with people. I love that. I love saying, okay, let's lock ourselves in a room for a day or two and really, vision cast and get out onto paper, where you want to take your content in the next 6 months. But it doesn't have the same depth or meaning to just be the person, producing those things. And so, for me, I think it's partially that. It's the depth factor. The other part is the deliverable, being able to hand over something that is really valuable. And then also, when you have things that are project-based, you have the ability to create space to pause in a really different way than if you have clients that are on a recurring retainer, because there's always that pressure to perform and deliver recurring value. And for me, like, I'm a really high performing person. And I'm very, again, it's that Enneagram 3 thing. It's like that ambitious thing. And so the amount of energy and anxiety that I found that I was feeling constantly, being like, are they happy enough? Are they, are we delivering the value they want? Is there, do they hate us? Are they going to be mad at the next client meeting? That sort of stuff keeps me up at night. Whereas when I'm in a project where I'm working more closely with somebody, I have a pulse point on that. And if those voices come up, I can really quickly be like, no, the work is going great. We really love what we're doing, and, we're right on track. It's harder to do that and find that confidence sometimes, I think, in recurring cadences with people. And that's not to say I might not find, a level where I like doing that in the future. Like I have recurring coaching clients and I really like those engagements. But I just find that when it comes to deep work, I find that that's more possible in a project type environment.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense. And I can understand that just the constant pressure to deliver on value over and over and over and over and over again, like year in, year out, it gets to be a lot. And that makes, yeah, I like that. So does that, I mean, you have established an amazing network because you've been in this community for a long time, but with project-based work, I think the financial challenge of it that I see a lot with people who do that is creating that constant pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
So having that incoming pipeline all the time is a big part of that. So is that something that you've seen? Has that been easy for you? Like no problem, the pipeline's always there, or is that a challenge?
No, I mean it varies, right? So it's so interesting. I would say like 2020 and 2021 were our biggest years and in business. And projects were just showing up overnight, more than we could handle. And I'm sure it was similar for you too. It was like everybody I know, especially in service space, it was a very big year for them. And then this year's been really different. But I do have a level of confidence in terms of not only being able to have those things show up, but also in a sense of like what is enough as well. Because for me, scaling my model back and focusing on like, okay, this is how much I know I need to make to take care of myself. I feel a lot more confident in my ability to do so because I did that my first year in business without really knowing what the hell I was doing.
Yeah.
And so to me, like it's a lot less intimidating to figure out, how to make that much money than it is to figure out how to make the amount of money it costs to maintain a recurring model with multiple team members. And so, I feel like even though I don't have some like perfected process and be like, this is how I'm not a big believer in things like, outbound marketing and things like that. I don't do any of those things to kind of force the hand of my pipeline. But I do feel like, there's also a level at which when you really are really clear as to what enough looks like, it's easier to be like, okay, this is how many things I need to be able to get to that point, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Instead of just trying to get as much as you possibly can because you're in this 300% growth mode where
Exactly.
you are always trying to get something extra and new.
Yeah, and again, it's I know you and I both are well aware of like profit first type stuff, and it's like it's that notion of like your business becoming just like this money machine where there's like how much is enough? Well, there's never enough. Like it just needs to be more and more and more because let's be honest, like the cost to run a company keeps going up, so therefore the amount of money you need to make keeps going up. Whereas when you're in a model where you have a firmer sense of enough, you can start to really use that to build backwards and get pretty clear as to like, oh, actually, if I just had 10 projects this year at X value, like I'm gonna be fine, And so that's a nice way to see things. And this, I would say, I'm only just now like approaching a point where I feel like I'm at that place. Whereas, for years I was just building from a place of like, I just need more.
Yeah. And you can get a lot more choosy at that point too of who you work with. If you're like, I have 10 spots, this is what I do. I want to make sure that I'm working, like my time is spent with people that I really enjoy working with and on projects that are really exciting.
Yeah.
Um, I know we're coming up on our time, but I want to ask a couple like financial questions to
Okay.
you.
Yeah.
Um, in this kind of new model, what's the most important financial metric for you?
That's a good question. Profitability, that's a big thing. And I think that's again a lesson that I had to learn the hard way. But definitely again with that like $1 million club mindset, you're just focused on net revenue. And it wasn't until I took a really hard look at, the ways in which we weren't profitable, that I really started to shift my perspective and go, actually, like I'd much rather have a business that took home, that made $250,000 or $500,000, and I got to take home half of that than have a business that makes $1 million and I'm taking home barely anything. So for
Right.
me, profitability is probably the biggest measure of success. And gross revenue is nice, but if it's not profitable, it doesn't really matter to me.
Yeah. What about, have you gotten any really great pieces of financial advice that you'd like to share?
Actually, one that I got recently that I was really excited about that is new to me is about a solo 401k. I had never heard of the concept before.
Mm.
And I think one of the best things that we can do as business owners is learn about all the different ways that our businesses can, allow for us to support ourselves not just now, but into the future. And um, saving for the future was not really a concept that I was taught growing up. And again, I have parents who are entrepreneurs, but
Mm.
nobody was talking about like what they're putting aside for retirement and things of that nature. And so that's something that I've been really focused on. And I always thought, you couldn't have any sort of, investment vehicle unless you had like a full blown 401k for the
Oh,
company.
yeah.
And so that was something I'd worked really hard to establish. But in talking with my 401k provider, and learning with him recently, he shared about the solo 401k model. And I was like, oh, this is great. This makes a lot of sense. And I think that there's a lot of successful solopreneurs and consultants out there that don't know that that model exists and can be a really good vehicle for them to put aside for their future in a tax-free sort of way. So I definitely will be shouting from the rooftops, with anyone that I know or work with of like, hey, are you doing this? Because it's a really great way for you to put away money for yourself and to take care of yourself in a way that
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of solopreneurs are doing.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of focus on like, I have the money that I need right now in
Mm-hmm.
just all business owners. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not just, solo providers that have that kind of, I would say, recurring focus is too much on like, what is money coming in right now? And we're not thinking about the future that much. Cause I
Mm-hmm.
guess we just assume that the business will eventually take care of us
Mm-hmm.
down the road, or maybe we'll sell the business or something. I'm not exactly sure all the mindsets that go
Yeah.
into that, but I think that that's really smart. And solo 401ks are great if you are, the only person in your business or you have just part-time employees. There's some
Mm-hmm.
rules around that, but definitely something you can talk to your retirement specialists for. So that's great.
Yeah.
Um, I have one last question, but before I ask it, how can people find out more about you and everything you've got going on?
Yeah, so I'm on all of the social medias. My handle is at it's Maddie Reeves, and Maddie is spelled Maddy, and it's kind of a joke because everybody always spells my name wrong. So I'm always going, it's Maddy Reeves, and so that's why that's my social media handle. And then of course I'm on LinkedIn, Madeline Reeves, and then our company website is fearlessfoundry.com. And one of the things I always love to offer whenever I'm on a show like this is, if there's anyone listening who is kind of asking that preliminary question of like branding, marketing, what do I need to be doing? And maybe, wants to sit down for 30 minutes and just get some free guidance on what they should be doing to really take their brand to the next level. That's something I'd love to offer your audience as just an offer is, if you listen to this and you want some help, just reach out to me. I'd be happy to spend some time doing that.
Awesome. I appreciate that. I'm sure people will as well. Last question is, what is your favorite podcast?
Oh, this is a good question. I bounce around a little bit, but I am a big fan of Glennon Doyle's podcast because there are a lot of books and guests that she brings on where I'm like, oh, I should really read that book, but I haven't, or I won't, or I won't have time to do it. But I just feel like she does a really good job of creating really beautiful conversations between women about, kind of the more nuanced things. So I'd say that's the one that I stick to most consistently. And then I'm also a really big fan of one of my clients' podcasts. One of my clients is an amazing woman named Dr. Avanti Kumar Singh, and she has a really successful podcast called The Healing Catalyst, which is all about Ayurveda and wellness and health. And very similarly, she brings on just really fantastic guests to talk about, science and well-being and health. And it's a really fantastic show. So I kind of bounce back and forth between those two.
Nice. Awesome. The Glennon Doyle one is We Can Do Hard Things, right?
Yes.
It's that one. Yeah. I just listened to 2 episodes of that were on the Enneagram. So if anybody heard us say Enneagram on this show and you didn't know what it was, that might be a good one to go and get a good introduction for. So, all right. Well, Madeline, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing all your wisdom today and being open and transparent. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Hannah. It was so great to chat with you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Financial Clarity Podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes to learn more about today's episode and click subscribe on your favorite podcast app.